So my first real experiment, I conducted when I was 4 years old, and I conducted it on the back of my father's labor contractor's truck, because he had stopped doing that. And I asked my mom, why do plants in the shade grow taller than plants in the sun? I thought plants needed sun. And so she said, well, you know, go outside and you can plant some seeds in that truck, and that side is shady, always in shade, and this one gets sun. So I said, okay. And I planted them, and they were growing. Actually, they were also, I had to see that they were growing, so I kind of lost a lot of seeds that way. Because I was curious, like, are they growing? I can't see them. And so then that taught me patience. But then the ones in the shade did grow taller. But the more important lesson was I forgot to water them for a couple days, and they all died. And so then my mom said, oh, but you can do it over. I said, oh, okay. So you learned, you know, was learning by my mistake. Just remember to water them next time. That was my first experiment. And it turns out we still really don't know exactly why that happens. So it's okay not to know.
Well, my dad was an old-time general practitioner, and so I just was going to go into medicine. And then he died freshman year, and I had gone to Stanford. I had a scholarship, but I went to Stanford because they called it the farm, and I had grown up in Iowa, so I knew farms. They had horses, and I knew horses. And my grandparents' cook in Mexico had once worked for Leland Stanford, so I thought we had family ties. And I went there. I had no idea that we were poor. You know, in my little town, it was like we weren't considered that. So right after my dad died, I was really shocked, and I got a C in a chemistry test, and I went into my chemistry professor, and I said, I don't know what I don't know, and he said, well, dear, I don't know how important academics is. Maybe it's not important at all. Maybe what you ought to do is quit school and go home and get married and cook for your husband. And so I found myself in the library crying for hours, right? And so I don't know about you, but all my relatives are like here all the time. And so I pulled down a book, and I opened it up. It was a book of poetry. So I said, well, my grandmother wants me to be an English major, so that's what I'll do. So I switched, and I was an English major. But you know, if you go to Catholic schools for 12 years, your poetry is like a Hallmark card, so that was not going to work. Anyway, I finished early and immediately went to Mexico. My self-esteem was in the basement. Anyway, the minute I got to Mexico, it was wonderful, but I got to Oaxaca, and I was in the market, and I noticed that these women, and it turns out they're from Tehuantepec, had purple huipiles. Their shirts were purple. And I thought, the Queen of England is the only other person with purple. How do they do it? And it turns out that they grew these mollusks in the ocean, these snails, right? And they take the cotton, the men take the cotton down and agitate it, and the mollusks give off this dye, and the salt water acts as a mordant, and then top that off with all the curin that is around the market. And I was like, I've not seen anything of the world, and that was how I became a scientist. That was it. And then the next thing that happened was I went up to Alaska, and I was up there for a little over a year, and out in the bush from February to July. It was really cold, and we ended up building a cabin for a guy, and out in the river days away from, and we ran out of supplies, so we had to live on what we could hunt and gather. And I had read like every ethnobotanical book I could get my hands on, so I was doing all that stuff. And what happened was that I was out one day hunting and gathering, and I started, for some reason, thinking, what would we have if there were no photosynthesis? And everything started like dripping away. It was like, no, there wouldn't be trees, there wouldn't be moose, there wouldn't be wolves, there wouldn't be this grass. I would just see rocks and sludge, you know. And it was like a bolt in my heart, and that's how I became, I think, the second PhD in botany in the country.
Hi, I'm Gabe Montano. You know, it's funny when I think about this, and It comes off of the photosynthesis side. I actually did my PhD in photosynthesis. When I was 8 years old, so I was not the kid that grew up always knowing I wanted to be a scientist. Not at all. I was pretty rambunctious. Ulysses earlier said I looked like a football coach, and that's more it. I was an athlete. I grew up playing sports. I still run my lab sometimes like a coach. I was always very competitive. Science is my competition these days. And I love it in the same ways. I get a kick out of it. But I think that there are a lot of students that come from different worlds, and I feel like, I feel like I either had to have a calling to be a scientist or I'm not going to fit. And so I think sometimes I can serve in that role where they say, "Oh, you didn't want to be this your entire life?" No, I was lucky. I fell into it through some great mentors. Alba being one of them. That when I was starting my schooling. But when I look back at it, I remember in 5th grade there was a science, not a science fair, but we had to do a science something or other. So I decided to make. I was hungry, so I made a reflective, mirror to cook a hot dog. So I was doing solar cooking because I was hungry, and then about 8 years later, I got in trouble in the optometrist's office because I kept playing with all the optics and lasers, and they get it, go sit down, and they'd leave, and I'd start toying around with them again. I was fascinated by it. I didn't realize I loved optics. I loved photonics, and 10 years after that, I found myself as a photosynthetic person doing biophysics and as a laser jock. And so when I looked back, I said, you know what? It was always there. I just never actually realized it. I was just playing. And, Maggie and I talk a lot about this, and we had this conversation with Adelante yesterday, too. It's encouraging kids to just play is really important, to have fun. And so I do that with my students all the time, and they don't know what to do half the time. And I just tell them, play. Well, what's the answer? There's no answer. Play. And I think that's really important, to keep that fascination with science alive with them. And, whoever they are, that's okay. Wherever they're coming from, that's okay. That's what's going to make them a great scientist, by being who they are, not what they think I am, or what they think. Look to their other people and say, oh, that's what a scientist looks like. No, it looks like whoever you are, and what you can be. So, anyway, that's kind of my story.
So I'm Derek Brazil, and for me, I guess it started when I was a kid. I always loved taking my toys apart and putting them back together. So I always was interested in how things worked. And so that kind of started me on my course towards being an engineer, which took a detour to biology, which is good for me. But yeah, that's where it started, this inquisitiveness of how do things work, and that carries over into science, of course.
My name is Carmen Domingo. I was really thinking hard because I don't think it was very clear to me at all growing up. My mom would give me dolls. I remember not really wanting to play with dolls, but that's what I had. And I also grew up bilingual, and I remember struggling in school with reading and writing. And so thinking, when I got to high school, I didn't think writing was my thing. And then I had a pretty good chemistry teacher, and I thought, well, maybe it's more on the science. But I think I was really unsure. I was sitting here thinking, so glad I'm the last one. Because I was like, what was it? I'll figure it out, Yeah. But anyways, it was hard to figure it out. And I think I had this push from the family, like medicine. You see that always as role models on TV. And so when I started college, I was like, okay, I guess I'm a pre-med. And then I quickly realized, it's not going so good either. So I think it took me a long time to figure it out.
When did you figure it out?
When I was in college and I was pre-med, I heard from a friend that he was doing research. And I was like, ooh, what's that about? And so I grew up in Los Angeles next to the 401, I'm forgetting, 405. I was 1 block away from the 405. So horrible, smog and pollution. And so I heard there was a pollution lab that was doing research on, except that I found out they were working with animals. And they were working with dogs and rats. And I was like, I don't think I can do that either. But across the way was embryology. And I went and talked to someone who was working with chicken eggs. I was like, chicken eggs? I think I can do that. And, and so that's where my passion for biology began.
Okay, I'm going to ask more questions and then be thinking what you want to ask them. Okay? So, one more question from me. When do you think you engaged in your first leadership activity, as people might recognize it, or as you might say, yeah, this is probably where I did it first? Whatever leadership means to you, because it means different things to all of us. So when do you think you started that? And Carmen? Let the last be first now.
I was hoping I would start. It started late. I think I was an associate professor, and I was asked if I wanted to be associate chair and help with the Department of Biology in terms of, doing the schedule and thinking about curriculum and students. And at that time, I was working with a bunch of different programs that had to do with diversity and increasing diversity. And so I think they were desperate, honestly. They didn't want anybody to do the schedule and to figure out hiring lecturers and stuff. But I thought maybe I would have a role in thinking about the curriculum for our students. And so I accepted. So that was my first.
For me, I guess it would have been junior high school when I ran for junior high school president, student body president. Yeah, so I did.
All right.
So it was really more about thinking about changes that we wanted to have done in the junior high school and realizing that the only way that I'd have any sort of voice in it, trying to get those accomplished, would be to be the president, because then I'd have the principal's ear, at least on a certain level.
So I'm going to be like a politician. Say, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm going to answer something else. It's related, though. So my first foray was in sports, being a team captain of my basketball team in high school, and then a class officer and stuff. But one of the things that I was talking to some folks earlier about this is they'll ask sometimes about that, your leadership. How'd you get into that? SACNA's presidency board, et cetera. Things will come up. So you know what? I talk to my students a lot about the difference between goals and outcomes. Take SACNAS, for example. The goal is never to become SACNAS president. It was an outcome. The goal was to make a difference. And that's kind of always been my pursuit. I've never really actively pursued leadership. You almost do it begrudgingly when you feel it's a call of service that I've got something to offer, and if I don't step up, I can't complain. I've got to do that, and that's kind of been, even now, it's still what guides me. I don't really look for it as much as if I'm needed and I feel like I can help, I'll try to take it up. But I'm really happy when others do.
This is hard. I can think of. I don't know.
No, you.
Well, what's really interesting is in the mentoring program that I have developed, one of the things we do is go from birth to now to understand that this is our unique trajectory, and it's our unique resource for understanding who we are, right? And what's amazing to me is that even at my age, I'm still learning things. So I don't know if I'll tell you about leadership, but I will tell you what I found out the last few years, and that was when I was born, my sister, so I was the last of 6, and my sister had polio 2 years before, and she lost the use of anything below her waist, and the whole there was no therapy, and the whole family was just a mess, and my dad thought he brought it home to her, and it was just terrible. And so people most of the time didn't know where I was after I started walking. And we lived 2 blocks from the highway and 2.5 blocks from the Mississippi River. And so from my 2 to 4, I was gone a lot. My mom didn't know where I was. People would walk by and then tell her what yard I was sleeping on. And I think it led to, a real sense of independence and exploration, but I also think it led to a sort of a sense of, I don't know, it's hard for me to join groups. So I, I don't know, I've been a leader, I've tried to lead, but it's really hard for me to join. Maybe the band that we were in for 25 years is maybe it, but sorry, I wish I could do better.
Okay, so I didn't realize that I was a leader until I said something to my 6th grade teacher about fairness. So she said it had to do with some kind of what I considered maltreatment or unfair treatment of the Latinos in my class. And so I said it, and I said it out loud in front of the class. And she blanched. And then she took me aside and said, "We don't expect that from people like you who are leaders." So that was the first time anybody labeled me in that way, and I didn't realize that I was. I mean, I had been elected a little presidency and little kind of things like that, but and class reps to whatever, but I really didn't see myself as that. And then it happened again in 8th grade when we were told, okay, so the principal is going to be selecting people to lead, like give the talk for the 8th grade graduation, all that kind of stuff. And I piped up again, and I said, how is he going to make those decisions? Yeah. And so I also got called later, and said, you need to know that he is fair. And I said, I don't think so. I said, because I was part of the honor guard for the previous graduation, and there were no Latinos at all. And we were about 25% of the 20% like that of the student body. So just if you have 10 people, you'd expect 2. And so so then she said, well, that wouldn't enter his mind. And I said, well, we'll see. And so I was the representative in 8th grade. And and why? Because I come from a family, my mother, especially, she had the time, in quotes, to do this. But, if you're going to complain, you better have a solution or step up. And so that's the kind of thing. And she was into social activism as well. So sort of I didn't fall too far from that tree. That's it. And also my dad, someone wanted to show that there was integration or welcomingness in my town, which was the orange capital of the United States in the 20s. Also, my town was one of the strongholds of the Ku Klux Klan in Southern California. Oh yeah. So it was an interesting kind of situation there, and my parents went to a segregated school, and so they were really they didn't say you're being treated unfairly, but they would say that people may not be treated equally, and so you need to be aware of that you don't do that. Yep.
My mom was a political activist also after my sister went to college and whatever. And so it was nice because she was 42 when I was born, so I had this really older mother, and she and I were like partners in going, and she was a volunteer in our penitentiary. She got guys off death row. She found people serving their brother's time. She found people serving time for things they didn't do. She took care of families. I grew up with foster brothers, and we had like 28 foster kids. So I think, it wasn't like I was leading an army, but my mother was such an incredible role model for me as what was really important. And my grandmother, when they came from Mexico during the Revolution, they had to leave everything in Aguascalientes and come up to New Orleans. And she put her arms around the kids, and she said, losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to us. She goes, now we know what's really important. It's our family and our education and our faith, the things that can't be taken away from us. Thank God for nothing. And so thank God for nothing was really our family motto.
Okay, questions from the floor? You can direct it to all of them or to one of them?
To Gabe, not a question, but just your mentioning of play as a method really spoke to me, because whenever I can't do something or I don't know how to do something, don't know how long it's going to take, I say I'll play with it and I'll let you know. And I think science should be like that. I mean, we don't know what the outcome for any project really is going to be, because that's the purpose of science, right? We want to discover the unknown. So play is a really great way to approach it. I like that part.
Yeah, no, we've been having these conversations for a long time. And I'll ask Maria Elena and Maggie to speak on this, because this is something that we've been recognizing, and it's becoming more and more crucial. The more that things are to design and to test, the less the freedom for playing and creativity comes about. And I talk to students all the time that I'll tell them I actually don't feel like I became a decent scientist until well into my career, until I started bringing my entire self in there and realizing, you know what, I do have crazy ideas, and they're oddball ideas, and maybe it's because I'm a first gen scientist who did, I didn't have anybody to bounce these things off, and I'm crazy enough to try it, right? But that's what actually makes me a really good scientist. And so I try to get them to not limit that and to grow from that. But it's so crucial that early we get students just playing, having fun. There is no answer. You tell me what you find out, But did you want to add to that, Maggie?
Well, about 20 years ago, I was teaching genomics, and the kids were like, there were juniors and seniors and grad students, and they weren't really getting engaged in the class. And so there were a couple of things I did. One of them was I said, okay, let's just pretend like we're going into a cell, right? And so I said, well, how big do we, it's a yeast cell, because that's what I work on, so that's 5 microns. How big should we be, And it's like, nothing. And then I said, well, okay, let's be 25 nanometers. That's the size of a ribosome. That'll be fun. I'll get you past a cell wall in the plasma lemma. And so I got him past, and I said, well, what do you see? And these guys had every biology class on Earth, and I finally asked a young woman, and she said, I see walls. And it really scared me. And so I spent a year actually going all around the country, talking to AP high school teachers, talking to people at NSF and NIH and everywhere. And the general idea was that the problem with education was fire the teachers, the kids are lazy, and the parents aren't doing their jobs. And I thought, well, if that's really the problem, we would have solved it by now. And so I found these 2 people in Colorado that were studying kids from 0 to 5, and they said that if they weren't allowed to play, they lost symbolic and analytical reasoning and empathy, and it also impacted their memories and a bunch of things, but I was seeing the symbolic and analytical reasoning. So I thought, well, I'll try to see if I can restore these kids' imaginations, right? So I started doing a lot of visualizations. We visualized whatever I was going to teach that day. We'd first of all close our eyes and be a piece of cDNA or be whatever that is, and it really helped. But they'll get mad at you first. They'll get really mad. No, mad. No, it's uncomfortable. But when they figure it out, you can't believe it. They get so happy. It's just, it's like, and you're sitting there, and that might happen in your office, and you just go, your parents should be here and see this,
So yeah, playing, exploring, right? I mean, I fixed a lot of toys in my house, and they never worked again. But engineering was out. I did a lot of experiential learning, hands-on stuff in my house. I mean, I just did it, and I was encouraged by my mom and dad to check it out. But one of the things that made me very sad, I was almost brought to tears one year by my cell biology students when I gave them a task that they had to figure something out. I don't even remember what it was, but I put them in groups, and they were supposed to work on this little problem. And it was unknown But I said, you think about it. How would you approach it if you don't know? We don't know this. How would you approach it? And we just talked about certain kinds of methods, blah blah blah, and some of them were almost in tears because they couldn't get the answer.
Right.
And then so I said, what have we done to you?
Right.
What have we done to you? Because that's not how. We're not training good scientists. And so now with my, in our Science 100 class, which is the introduction class to the university and to science, I give them bags of candies that are sorted. I spend a lot of time sorting candy right around Halloween, and we do an experiment, and I give them a bag of candy, put them in groups, and say, sort these candies in any way you want, but you have to be able to rationalize it. And there have been groups who could not do it. They were afraid of getting the wrong answer. And that is terrifying to me. But when I tell them there's no right answer, no one answer, but to have to stand by how they've done it, then things are loosened up a little bit. But it's really sad that we somehow have trained them to find that one answer, which is not good. It's not good for science, in my opinion. But these kinds of exercises, where it's low risk, they're more open to trying stuff. I just didn't know you weren't supposed to try stuff. You know?
Yeah, I would say that 20 years ago when I figured this out and I was like helping these students, and we go down into inside mitochondria, or we go look at you get really close to a nuclear pore and you kind of go, well, what's happening here? And, and you have all these laws of physics that you have to remember and stuff. But the students then asked questions that I am seeing now in I've seen for 15 years in Cell papers and in Nature papers. I mean, they ask incredible questions.
It's a very simple question. When you were young, before you started your academic journey, you wanted to be something, and you ended up today as something else. Did you achieve your career goal when you were young? How many of you got the same goal achieved, or you had to change? Any of you achieved what you wanted? Then what made you to change? I want to give my own story before you give. I wanted to be a medical doctor because I was one of the 13 siblings in the family. And all my brothers were engineers, and my parents wanted at least one person to be a doctor who can take care of the family. You were the youngest? No, I'm in the middle. Oh my God. So, it's very competitive in India. You don't get that easily. You have to be top of the top. So I didn't make it. So other option I had was to pursue undergraduate BS, either plant science or animal science. I hated animal science. I wanted to be a plant scientist. I didn't get admission for my graduate school in plant science because it was very competitive. I got the letter, either you have to be animal science or in anthropology. I didn't even know what is the definition of anthropology. So I ended up in animal science, and I ended up becoming a biomedical researcher, dealing with the animals. So that's what happened in my case. I want to know whether there is somebody in the same club. So you all in the same club. So you wanted to be something, and you became something else. So is it your interest, or circumstances put you in that?
Well, I guess as I shared, it took me a while to realize I liked biology, and I did research. But then when I graduated from college, I wasn't sure that that was really a good path for me. So I was looking for work, and back then there weren't really that many biotech companies, so I didn't know what to do with my biology degree. So I went back home, and as I mentioned, I grew up in LA next to the 405. I became an air freight forwarder. My family, I knew had friends that worked in the airport, and I thought, oh, this will be fun. Maybe I'll travel the world. And I worked for a year, and it was awful. Typing, I'm not a good typist. I mean, it was before computers. and I thought, what the hell am I doing here? The lab was fun, you know, it was creative. I could design things. I loved microscopy. I'm like, what am I doing here? So in my second year, I decided to apply for graduate school. And I thought, gosh, I don't know how that's going to go. And I got some help from the mentor from my university. And I got interviews. And everywhere I went, they'd say, here's the air freight forwarder who's interviewing for the PhD program in biology. And I thought, oh, dear, I was a biologist. I was an air freight forwarder for a year and a half. That's not really my identity. But lo and behold, I got into a PhD program. And in fact, so anyways, then I seem to have these crises all the time. And so in my PhD program, Derek probably knows because we were in graduate school together, I was always like, oh gosh, I don't know about this. I don't know if I'm going to survive. And so, that was grad school. And when I finished, one of my friends, he was brilliant, he got hired as a professor. And at the time I was working on frogs, he worked on frogs, and so he said, come and be a postdoc in my lab. So he rescued me, and I went and did a postdoc while he was setting up his lab. And then I had the same crises. Oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing here. My experiments are all failing. And then I had a dear friend that had a position at San Francisco State, just across the bay. I was at Berkeley. And she's like, apply. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. I don't really know what I'm doing. And she encouraged me. And so I got the job. And so I don't know, that doesn't help all of you, but it just shows you, like somehow through those crises, there was always someone there to encourage me and, and to nudge me and kick me in the tushy, as they might say, to then apply. And so I feel blessed because I have had a really amazing career, but every time I had someone helping me, so.
For me, I started off wanting to be an engineer in chemical engineering, of all types of engineering. And I was doing that up until my junior year in college. And it was when I was taking P-Chem and the second semester of fluid mechanics. For all you chemists out there, God bless you. But P-Chem,
That sounds like fun.
P-Chem was a course where I could not follow what the professor was doing. We would get these problem sets, and my friends and I would work on these problem sets all weekend long. We would turn them in. He would grade one answer, and if you got that answer wrong, didn't matter if you got all the other ones right, you got a 0. Yeah, so that was frustrating. The second frustrating part was the fluid mechanics class. It wasn't taught by the professor who normally taught it because they were on sabbatical. So they had his former grad student come in and teach the course. But of course, she already had a job, so she had to actually be at work, so the class was taught at 7:30 in the morning. I remember distinctly, it was over Thanksgiving break, and I was studying for 2 midterms and realizing I don't understand any of this. I'm really not enjoying this anymore. Luckily, I was taking a biochemistry class that I loved. And at that point, I'm like, I'm done with chemical engineering. I'm doing biology now. Never looked back.
So I said earlier I didn't want to be a scientist my whole life, and I actually I started playing in rock bands and punk bands when I was about 14. Those are the days. I know we still got a jam, Maggie. I know, definitely. And I'd get snuck into the back of bars and get up there and play and leave after. And so I loved music. And when I went to college, I went to as an English major and a journalism major, I wanted to be a rock critic. And I'm kind of an idiot savant when it comes to rock and roll history. I know way more about it than I should. And it's a passion, me and my brother. We just always love it. So that's what I wanted to do. Because of some really great mentors, again, I kind of fell into the science side. And when I graduated, though, I had a minor in creative writing. I still love to write. And so I thought about pursuing a Master of Fine Arts with Alberto Rios at ASU. And I went and met with him, and he was willing to take me in because I still wrote my favorite book of all time, Pig Cookies, which is a phenomenal read if any of you have the chance. And so it was either that or I was going to go pursue a PhD. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the decision, I still love to write, creative prose writing. But I said, you know what, I can't do chemistry and physics in the kitchen, but I can always write. And so that's what pushed me to the side of pursuing the PhD as opposed to the MFA. And I've never regretted it. I tell students all the time, I got the best job in the world. I get paid to come up with ideas and try them. I play for a living. There's nothing better. And I can still write. I still do write. I'm working on a collection of stories right now. So it wasn't the plan, but I'm glad it went the way it did. Yeah.
Well, so I told you we spent a year and a half. I was trying to get to see Pablo Neruda, and so I spent a year and a half in Mexico, lived in Guatemala and then Colombia. Then I went a year in Alaska, and from Alaska I went to Minnesota. And I was with my first husband, whose whose motto about marriage apparently was "so many women, so little time," which is. Which is not a really good foundation for a long. So I got to Minnesota and I was trying to find a job. I worked as a tailor for one day. That was a long story. I went to a bank. I was going to apply as a bank teller. I said, well, can I work up to vice president? And they said, no. Our bank tellers are so happy they become career tellers. And I thought, oh, no. And so I got a job as a paraprofessional nurse in a clinic that was mostly for urban Native Americans. And they hired me because, one, I'd been to Stanford, so I must have some intelligence. And two, I'd been on food stamps, so they knew I would be nice to the people that were at the clinic. And so what miracle it was is that was connected with the University of Minnesota. So I got scholarships to start taking classes to figure, did I want to go to horticulture or botany? So I kept deciding. But what was fascinating to me was how different the professors were to me than before when I was an undergrad. I mean, they were actually wanted to hear from me. It was like amazing. So I also had this other life as a singer. And so I applied for graduate school, and I figured the only place, my first husband was in Hawaii, and he said, oh, let's try it again. So I was like, okay, so anyway, so I got into the University of Hawaii. And the night before I was heading off for graduate school, I got an offer to front a blues band that had gigs all over the United States. And it was like, oh, we'll always find a bass player, so we'll be all right. So I went to graduate school in Hawaii, and and then it was like a miracle. I was so interested, I scared the professors, right? Because there'd be 400 people in a class, and I just had like all the questions, and they would like back away from me, and. So that was it. And the other thing was like the stuff that chemistry professor said to me, I ended up being a little grateful to him because after I really knew what I wanted, all that stuff just bounced off like bullets off of Superman. It was just I was not worried about it. And as a result, like I just met the most interesting people and I had the most amazing time. And then when I got to Wisconsin and then we made all these discoveries about stuff, it was really cool. And then when I was looking for a job, I came to New Mexico and I just saw the students and I said, I've got to be here. I just miss hearing Spanish and these guys are beautiful and I don't know if they're going to have a great teacher and I would want to be a great teacher for them and that I've never regretted that. Well, that's why I'm so old. And thank you. Yes, I do remember you now.
So when I went to college, I thought I had really good high school biology teacher, and I had taken all of the biology classes I could take, and so I actually got to be a TA in chemistry and in biology because I could have graduated, and I didn't want to graduate early. Anyway, so when I went to college, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a biology major, and I went to talk. I had to make my own because it wasn't a biology department. It was biology and zoology, and so I was told when I went to talk to the zoologist, why would you even worry about plants? And so my great-grandmother was a sobadora curandera. Plants are there, man. I mean, and I learned how to pick the right plants for my great-grandmother, when she was making these decoctions for people or plasters for people, because they'd come to her house. She was a very good healer. And so anyway, so I said, oh, I'm not going to work. It's not going to work for me here, in that department. And so I went to became a botany major because that was much more. It was better for me, more in line with what I thought was important. And so I had a really Pomona. So Pomona College is the founding college of the Claremont colleges. Okay, and so. And we were treated very, very nicely. I will say, if you had a problem, you could talk to somebody and they would help you. But when I went to, and so when I went to, made the decision I was going to go to graduate school, I went to graduate school because all of my colleagues at Pomona went to graduate school or law school or some kind of professional school. I mean, I think 90% of us after 2 years were in graduate school or professional school. I mean, that just... yes, it was intense there, right? I will say that I worked really hard, but it wasn't hard work. I just worked hard, except in politics in the year 2000. That was a hard class. It was reading the Daedalus, reading economics. Oh my God, thought my brain was going to break. Anyway, but that was I've been a botanist since the second day at Pomona College, because I didn't even know there was a thing called botany. I just thought it was biology of plants, But I think there were times after that when I went to Berkeley when I thought, oh, maybe I don't belong here. Because at Pomona, they assumed you were smart. Mm-hmm. At Berkeley, you had to prove you were. That's a different task. That's a very different task because you're scrutinized in a different way. Yeah. That's how I changed.
But you did. You survived.
I survived Berkeley. Yeah, I did. I got my PhD there, and I did well, But yeah.
So we have one last question from this corner of the room. I think it's an important question for all of us in the audience.
Okay, so I just want to ask really quickly how you guys find the time and the commitment to step back a little bit from the research that you guys do and love, and I know the same case for all of us, right, to step into that leadership role.
Well, this is really hard. So I'm at a comprehensive. So my lab was driven by undergraduates and master's students. So when I became dean of the College of Science and Engineering, which is, 7,000 students, 8 departments. I mean, it was so complicated. I kept my lab going for about 5 years, and then I closed it. I realized I couldn't write the grants that were needed. I couldn't give the mentorship that I really needed for the students. I couldn't write the papers. And I thought, my university and college needs my attention, because it was really hard during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. And you can see I almost want to cry, because it was so much of a part of who you are that giving it up was really difficult. And so I still have like an NSF advanced grant, and so I realized that I've shifted to thinking about how do I mentor and support my faculty so that they in turn can be the best mentors for their students. But I miss it.
Yeah, I have the same feelings. For me, the really first step was when I became chair of my department. And that basically took me out of my lab. So before I was still doing experiments myself. Once I took on the role of chair, I had to rely on my grad students and my postdoc to really do the work. And I was very much more supervisory than hands-on. And that was a tough step because I like playing in the lab. We all do, right? But that was kind of a nice transition in that I was still able to conduct research without me actually being the researcher. So then when I had the opportunity to become a provost, that was just one more step away. So I had to shut down my lab also. And again, yeah, I mean, my identity had always been as a scientist. I never had really considered going into higher ed administration until it kind of happened to me. So yeah, but I still do get to do research in a different way, in that I do have time to write infrastructure grants. I do have time still to collect data, analyze it. So I still get to use those same skills that I do in research. And kind of actually the things that really I enjoyed about doing research is just being now done in a different topic area.
No, and thank you for doing that. I mean, leadership's not easy, and doing things where you have to set aside what you work your entire life for can be tough. You know, my perspective that I always come back to for myself is I'm a scientist first and always. That's how I approach everything I do. And so my 4 years into leadership at different levels, department chair, center director, chief diversity fellow for the university, SACNAS president, I do them as assignments, and I do them on periods that I know I will cut back to what I am, which is a scientist. Now, if I have to take that plunge, and I'll cross that road when I get there, but right now I'm having fun doing what I do. And so I kind of approach it that way, but I really appreciate your question, because one of the things that when I talk to students a lot, one of their first questions, depending on what they're interested in, may be, well, how do I get involved? And my answer is always the same thing: get good, become important as a scientist. The only reason I have any voice anywhere in this country, and that anybody will listen to me, was because I'm respected as a scientist in my field. I have an international reputation in photosynthesis and bio-inspired materials in what I do. That's what makes my voice being able to be heard. And so I preach to them, don't try, there's gonna be work for you to do. That job, I wish it would go away, but it's not any time in our lifetimes. There's gonna be a need to be doing this. And if you are going to do service, if you are going to do it, guess what, it's just extra work. It doesn't mean you stop here. You just add it on top of your other duties, and you figure out a way to get it done. But don't ever stop being the scientist. That's the most important thing. Don't chase that as being this title that I want. Titles are never worth it. We all know that. If somebody yells doctor, they're going to expect us to save a life. We're in trouble, right? So the titles ain't worth it. It's not. Fulfillment and happiness is. And so that's the approach I take. I'm a scientist first and always, and that's always where I seem to come back to, and that kind of keeps me going.
Well, STEM is really fabulous because, I've got friends that are going to die in their labs. No, and it's wonderful. I'm so happy for them. I mean, and it feels like I'm still in the lab a bit, because they're there. And I've always decided when I was doing too many things, when I started imagining that I had parallel universes for my calendar and I missed meetings because I double booked and didn't realize it, then I would go, okay, I got to drop something. But I was the most efficient when my kids were little, right? I mean, they're little and you got to get them breakfast. And my kids wore their clothes to bed that they were going to wear the next day. Now, come on, there's got to be somebody in here who did that. Well, you're perfect. I'm not. Well, anyway, you just have all these things to do. And so you get into this rhythm and you wake up at like 5:30 and ride the exercycle or something, and then you get the kids up and then you go to work. And very efficient, and I got less efficient later. Now, when the kids were growing up, I didn't play music, but I have played music from graduate school pretty much all the way through until our band just broke up last year because of, anyway, long story, but it wasn't bad, but anyway, so I just took a jazz singing class to kind of get back into it. But I had to have music. I don't care what I did. I had to have music. If I don't wake up with a song in my head, I'm really miserable. And so I always tell people that there's this normal curve for faculty, and I'm like, you know me now. I'm like always off in the side. But I think one of the things is that I always, I could see what the students needed somehow, and so I developed this mentoring program, and then they wanted to come back, so I started a company, and then it was like, well, this has got to happen. You know what I mean? You just kind of put your face in it, and you can see where there's a non-random distribution, for example, and then you kind of go, well, there's a need something over here, and so that's what you do, and you just, it's like, it's joyous, I can't think of one day when I haven't been happy to do whatever I was doing.
Oh, I can think of a lot of them for me.
Well, that's because you're perfect.
No, come on, no. I'm actually closing down my lab. I'm not accepting graduate students, and it's hard. It's really hard. But until 7 months ago. Now I have all of this data to clean up and starting to write papers and finishing that experiment that the one kid didn't do. So I have all the reagents, I just have to do them. And that is my goal. So I really haven't given up my lab yet, and I'm not going to do that for another 2.5 years. But I think that there's somehow you do it. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of need, and so I will, there's a joke in my house. First of all, I have a very good partner. You saw, the candies for tomorrow are, because I went up and said, Jimmy, could you please? And he did. He said, I don't know if I have time. I said, Jimmy, it's not that far. Okay. So maybe I'll do it, okay? So I have a really good partner. That's one. The other part is that, we had meals of delicious cold cereal at times.
At night?
At night. Heck, just dinner. Delicious cold cereal. It wasn't crappy cereal. It was delicious cold cereal. And it was seen as it was acceptable and it was okay. And then when I became the SACNAS president, before I put my name in, I had a family meeting. I have one daughter and a husband. And I said, okay, you guys, my free time is going to probably disappear. And you have to tell me that you're going to be okay with that. And if you say yes, then I will do it. But if you say no, I won't, because I don't want to have this little feeling guilty all the time. So you need to be aware of this. And they both said, my daughter said, yeah, that'd be really cool, Mom. And then my husband said, go ahead, because you're a woman and they're not going to elect you. Why? Well, there'd never been a woman as SACNAS president, okay? So he said, those guys. And I go, okay. But, and so I think that I didn't have weekends. I was out of the house probably at least 2 weekends out of every month, traveling somewhere for SACNAS, or writing papers for SACNAS, getting the money to do what we needed to do. And I was also running a MARC program, an MBRS program, and a lab. So the mantra was, I'll rest when I'm dead, or sleep is highly overrated. That's it.
So this is a moment I just want to tell everybody. Ray Rodriguez is at Davis, and he's a person who is very uncelebrated. And during the time when there was a moratorium on cloning, he was in Paul Berg's lab, I think, at UCSF. And he and another guy named Bolivar made PBR 322. So if you've ever done any cloning, moved a plasmid, done anything like that, you know, his plasmid is in every GMO plant and animal in the world. Well, anyway, he had some money left over, and so he decided that he should bring a bunch of Latinas together to talk and see whether us older types could help the new Latinas. And so there's a cell paper. You can find it by just saying cell early Latinas in STEM, something like that, and that the PDF's available. And what I like about it is that all of us that met, like, I don't know, 20 people or something, you know, came up with a couple of tables about things that you're going to run into all the time and things that are just dependent on transitions. And there's advice for institutions, for mentors, and for individuals. And so anyway, I hope you go see it because I think it's helpful.
Yep. That's it. No,
We're good.